Welcome to the Hope for the Animals podcast, a project of compassionate living. I'm your host, Hope Bohannick, and I'm so glad you could join me today. As animal advocates, we are storytellers. And our guest today, Thomas Machowicz, is a filmmaker and photojournalist who tells stories of animals and the people who rescue them. We may not always think of ourselves that way as storytellers, but that is what we do so often. Storytelling is so important. It stirs emotion. It makes an issue personal and come to life. When we're talking to someone about the suffering in the dairy industry, for instance, we're telling the story of millions of cows, each with her own individual story of loss and pain and frustration and sadness. When we are talking about animal agriculture's impact on the environment, about climate change, we're telling a story of our future, a story of our present, a story of the elderly woman who died alone in her house from heat stroke because of the extreme heat domes that are covering our entire planet. We're telling the story of the Thule elk who die of dehydration because of the severe drought in California. And we need to not forget that animals have happy stories too. Farmed animal sanctuaries have a very important story to tell of the joy and contentment that farmed animals find when they find freedom, right? Stories of friendship and love and all the range of emotions that animals experience. They are capable of immense joy and forgiveness. So, since we're talking about stories today, before we get into the interview, I want to tell you one of my favorite stories, and it's a fish story. And I don't talk about fish enough. They are so often an afterthought in animal advocacy. So, this is a story of two goldfish named Blackie and Big Red. They were companions in a tank in confinement in someone's home. And Blackie was what is called a black moor goldfish. And he was born a little wonky. He was barely able to swim. He would just kind of hop around at the bottom of the tank. And his companion was Big Red. And Big Red was a larger, beautiful orange goldfish. And when they were fed with, the fish food sprinkled at the top of the tank, and it would drift down slowly through the water, Big Red would swim down and he would put Blackie on his back. And then he would swim Blackie up into the food and let Blackie eat first and let Blackie have his fill of food. And then Big Red would gently put Blackie back down at the bottom of the tank. And then Big Red would go and eat after Blackie had eaten. I love this story because Big Red, in his very generous gesture of helping Blackie to eat first, he's showing so much emotion, a range of emotion. He's showing compassion and kindness. He's offering caretaking to Blackie. He's showing friendship and empathy and selflessness, allowing Blackie to eat first, generosity. I mean, it's really beautiful. Are these traits that you would have ever thought of in a fish before? Probably not. But now you know the story of Blackie and Big Red. So you know the depths of kindness and compassion a fish is capable of. So if Blackie and Big Red are compassionate and conscious and caring, how can we cause the suffering and death of trillions of sentient, self aware individuals in the oceans? I think that this is really a wonderful story to tell anyone who still eats sea life. I really would love to do another podcast focused on fish. If anyone out there has any ideas of someone that I can interview who I haven't already, who's doing advocacy for fishes, let me know. I would love to do another fish focused episode. And if you're interested in hearing some of the past episodes about fish, you can go to our website, hopefortheanimalspodcast.org, and there's a button at the top for episodes. There's a drop-down menu where I have categorized numerous podcast episodes, and there is a category for fish. And all the episodes where I talk about fish are there, so check that out. Okay, so let's hear some more stories and transition into our interview for today. All right, I'd like to welcome in our guest today. We have Thomas Machowicz. Thomas is a photographer and filmmaker focused on animal rescue efforts and social issues. He started documenting animal rescues in 2018 after a visit to Cebu Sanctuary in Costa Rica. Along with Molly Condit, Thomas co-founded Sanctuary Doc, a nonprofit multimedia project that illuminates the major issues facing our world today by focusing on animals and the people who rescue them. Thomas's work has been published by BBC News, the Associated Press, Reuters, Vox, and he is a regular contributor to We Animals Media. Welcome to the podcast, Thomas.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, it's good to have you. I'm really excited to hear all about your work. But we like to start the podcast with a question about you and why and when you went vegan.
I went vegan in 2003 or 2004 for the first time, and I had a hard time doing it. The access to, options and education and knowledge and all that wasn't as prevalent. Not that I'm blaming it on that. My heart was in the right place, but I screwed it up. I ate all the wrong things and it went really bad for me. So I did it again here over the last 3 years, slowly reducing the amount of animal products that I was eating till I was down till really just sliced cheese was the only thing in my refrigerator. And I have to give credit to Victoria from We Animals Media. She and I were talking about a project that I was working on, and she said, well, why not just go vegan? And I thought, yeah, why not? So I did.
All right.
And that was that.
All right. So fairly recently, but you've kind of had it in your heart for a long time. You wanted to go there.
Yes, definitely had it in my heart. And it's kind of an interesting thing to talk about, I think, because even though, it was sort of like in my heart, I was just in a place in my life for, well, years where I was really able to like deny a lot of the sad feelings or the things that I thought were hard in the world or things that I thought were uncomfortable, not just relating to animal issues, but personal and humanitarian issues as well. My heart was like really closed off intentionally.
Mm.
Um, and when I started working on this sanctuary doc project and photographing animals in sanctuaries starting in 2018, and also through the process actually of getting sober, my capacity for compassion and love expanded. And with that expansion, came these changes in my choices, veganism being one of them.
Mm. Yeah, it's a process for people. It's true. It's not just changing what you buy at the store. It can be a very internal, you know, you've got to have the emotional capacity for it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So you're a photojournalist and a filmmaker, and you got into this work. In your bio, you talk about this sanctuary in Costa Rica. Tell us about how this all came about. What happened in Costa Rica and how did you start this work?
I was in Costa Rica on a helping lead a yoga retreat, and afterwards we went and visited a sanctuary pretty much because I wanted to take pretty pictures of animals. And I knew that like going to a zoo didn't really align with something, like something about that I knew didn't really feel right. But I thought, okay, we'll go to a sanctuary. I can be close to, like wild animals. I can make beautiful pictures of them without having to like sit out in the jungle for days hoping to get great photos that way. That was
So
my
it was
original
so
intention.
so it wasn't a farmed animal sanctuary. This was a sanctuary for wild Costa Rican animals.
Yeah, mostly howler monkeys, but they also had peccaries and squirrels and
What is a peccary?
peccary. What is a peccary? It's like a javelina. It's kind of like a wild pig, but
Okay.
a little bit different. Squirrels, gosh, what else do they have?
Did they have coatis?
Yes, that was on the tip of my tongue. That's what I was looking for.
That
Yes, they
was the animal
have
I remember from Costa Rica. I went to Costa Rica, 20, 30 years ago, and coatis were so beautiful. They're like nothing you've seen. It's kind of a cross between a monkey and a raccoon, kind of.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
they're gorgeous. They're so cool.
Wonderful. So you visited the sanctuary, had all these animals.
Yeah, visited the sanctuary, was able to photograph. I did, a really short film on the work that was being done at the sanctuary. And through that process, I learned why mainly howler monkeys were ending up there in the first place. And that is because of human encroachment and development on their natural habitat. So the big thing being roads and power lines that cut through the forest and separate the tree canopy. And howler monkeys, rely on a connected canopy to go from one group of trees to another group of trees as they feed and live throughout the day. Well, if a road or power lines separates that, then they have to climb down the tree, cross the road, go back up the tree to the other side. Once they're on the ground, there's a lot of stray dogs, for example, so dog attacks are actually a big reason that monkeys end up at the sanctuary. The biggest reason, though, is electrocutions on the power lines.
Oh my God, that's awful.
So
Wow.
without the proper insulation on the power lines and I don't know what it's called if it's a transformer, but basically, the pieces that connect all the wires together and keep the power moving down the line. If those aren't properly insulated, a monkey hand on one power line and the tail on the other, and a tree branch connecting it to the ground causes a circuit or creates a circuit and causes an electrocution.
Oh.
And so, yeah, they get electrocuted and killed or injured. Some can be released, and that's what Cebu does. Is they go through kind of this three-tier rehabilitation process before they're released back into the wild, or they stay there forever. And the moment that really got me, and you'll see this, it's the header on our website because this image just embodies everything to me. There are two blinded monkeys, both from electrocutions. One, Joey, was blind in one eye and he was younger, and Goldie was blind in both eyes and she was older. She was approaching the end of her life. So she had lived at the sanctuary for a long time and become sort of a surrogate mother for the orphan howler monkeys that come in. Often what happens is the babies, they cling real tightly to their mom as they're going through the canopy. If they get electrocuted on the power lines, the mom usually dies, the baby usually lives, so you end up with all these orphaned monkeys.
Mm.
And so she was kind of a surrogate mother for him, and there was this really sweet moment where he crawled over to her and grabbed her face with both hands and just started licking her and kissing her on her face. So that was a beautiful moment, and it was sort of this what it means to me, what it meant to me was kind of the embodiment of like love persists, right, even within these most challenging situations. I saw it for monkeys, but then I started seeing it for everyone.
Wow, yeah, that's a poignant and amazing experience that you had there. And obviously, it affected you deeply because it sparked this project that you're doing, Sanctuary Docs. So tell us about Sanctuary Docs and this multimedia project you started. Why did you start it and tell us a little about it?
Well, once I visited Cebu, we visited another rescue in Costa Rica, Territorio de Zaguates, which is like that huge stray dog rescue that you've probably seen videos of because they have over 1,000 dogs there, and the videos
Wow.
that come from it are really amazing because they live on this big like farm ranch, lots of grassland. They take the dogs running. It's very photogenic. So visited that, and then I thought, well, I'll continue doing this on different subjects sort of as I travel. And I did a photography workshop in Ukraine in 2019 and continued the project there and worked on animal rescue stories. And during that workshop, I grew a lot as a photographer and got a lot of great instruction from two wonderful mentors. And then I was sort of like ready to do it on my own, I guess I would say. Make better images on my own, learned how to tell a story better on my own. Then I started picking rescues to do in different parts of the world. So we've done a story on animal labor and tourism in Morocco, stories on exotic pet trade and animal labor in Cambodia and Bali. Beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I went and photographed what I call like the animal rescue pipeline, which is basically animal aid organizations going in, bringing in food, bringing out animals, as well as, the human refugee component of that. They're completely intertwined. So along with these stories, we've created a lot of others, and we continue to do this, and that's the point of Sanctuary Doc.
Yeah, and so you do photography, video, just do all of them have all those components, or what are the different multimedia components?
Sure. So it's short films, photo essays, and articles. The articles go along with the photo essays. Short films usually stand alone by themselves, though sometimes we have, some photography to go along with it, but mostly the short films are just what they are.
Okay. And one of those short films that came out recently, I wanted to ask you about. It's called Transfarming. And this was around farms in Switzerland that are transitioning, right, from animal farming to plant farming. Talk about that one because it's gotten a lot of attention. I know that people are really enjoying it and sharing it. And it's so hopeful and exactly what we need to be happening. Talk about this one.
It is hopeful, and really the work that Sarah, who's like the main character of that film, is doing, it embodies everything that Sanctuary Doc is about. So I really love that we had the opportunity to do this film, thanks to We Animals Media. They commissioned it. So it's about Sarah Heiligtag, who has created an organization that helps farmers transfarm from animal farms to vegan farms and sanctuaries. One interesting piece of this is that they don't do any outreach other than talking about the work that they're doing on the news, for example. But they don't cold call farmers and say, hey, do you want to transfarm? Because that really wouldn't work. But what's amazing is so many farmers have approached them. And after filming, or at the time of filming, I think there was over 100 farms that had transfarmed, mostly in Switzerland, but also a few in Germany and Austria. And that's an amazing amount of farms to change.
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful. And so it's not just to plant farming, some of them are becoming sanctuaries.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different for everybody. Some can make a living doing something other than farming, right? So maybe they stop farming and they just become a sanctuary, and then they get sponsorships for their animals, and they're able to sustain what is now their sanctuary because of their work and because of the sponsorships. Others keep the animals sanctuary style, and then they start doing like chickpeas or oat milk. And then others adopt out their animals completely and just change to plant farming with no animals on site.
Interesting. So everybody kind of has a different approach,
Yeah,
but the end result is now they are a vegan entity or a vegan business or a vegan sanctuary.
exactly. Yep, a total change.
Wow. Wow. And this is just a short film, which I think is interesting. It's cool because the documentaries, I think the documentary style for some people is harder to hold attention for a full hour and a half, 2 hour, deep dive,
Mhm.
uh, unless it's really well done or something that you're very interested in. I think for a lot of people, it's hard to hold their attention with that long form documentary. So this short film, I think, is much more approachable, and people will possibly watch this even if it's not whatever their thing or their interest, because it's a shorter form. Have you thought about all that?
I have only thought, no, I haven't. I haven't. I'll tell you why though, from my end, is that, the real long form documentary style that's a huge undertaking. And it's more expensive and there's more moving parts and it takes longer to come out. And then distribution of that is kind of also, I would say, more challenging. And I say that just because I've never done it. For some people, it's probably very easy. But you're right. I think the short form is more accessible in
Mm,
general.
yeah, yeah. Well, another story that you have on Sanctuary Docs that just came out is called Street Vets. And this one, it looks at houseless people, homeless people, and their companion animals, and the vets and volunteers and people that help them and their animals. It's a really interesting subject because, I think that on some level, people probably feel like, oh, well, people shouldn't have animals if they're homeless because, that they aren't able to care for them. But then on the other hand, I think that people that are houseless, I mean, they love their animals. They still care very much for their animals. Sometimes they're feeding their animals before themselves. And it can also be a means of protection. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that we should keep people with their companion animals, even if they are unhoused. So I thought this was a really interesting subject to tackle. Do you want to talk a little about this?
Sure, I would love to talk about this. Well, I think it's an interesting when we're getting into this idea of, should you have an animal if you're living on the street or not. I think it's an interesting thought experiment for those of us who are housed and feel relatively secure in it to imagine how many steps away from homelessness we might be.
Mm.
Over half of the American population spends more than 30% of their income on their housing, which is considered unaffordable at that point. The threshold for affordable housing is you spend 30% or less. So when we think about that, for some of us, we might be one missed paycheck away from not being able to make rent. For some people, it's one flat tire. For other people, it might be a combination of those things plus a medical issue, plus not having relatives to stay with, or not having savings. It's different for everyone. But I think when we think through it and think, okay, really, if I got cancer today and had to spend my savings and didn't have an income, where would I be and how would I be taken care of? So, like I said, it's different for everybody. Everybody is sort of like a few different steps away from homelessness, but it's there. It's there. And so we live in a place where this reality of becoming homeless is real and it's scary.
And would you be willing to part with your companion animals? And that's your,
Exactly.
I mean, I think very few of us would.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And that was a recurring theme in interviews that I did with people is, their dog eats before them
Mm.
and they've chosen to stay out of a shelter because the shelter doesn't allow dogs.
Oh, yeah.
And really, the one guy summed it up like this, or he put it like this. He said, if I'm living on the street today and we're in this tent and there's water dripping on us, and tomorrow we're in a mansion, and then the next day we're back on the street, my dog doesn't care. He just wants to be with me.
Yeah.
And in a situation that is so difficult, like living on the street. It's hard. I mean, it's hard. I don't have personal experience with it, but I've heard enough stories to know that it is super hard. This companionship and protection is important. Does every dog that lives on the street have a great life? No. But the reality is that not every dog that lives in a house has a great life either. So I think looking at it from this perspective of like, should homeless people have a pet or not? Like, it's not actually up for us to decide. It's up for us to put people in housing so that they can have a pet and so that they can have security and they can have a shower and they can have an opportunity to get a job, instead of putting all these moral rules on them that we ourselves wouldn't want applied to ourselves if we ended up homeless, which is a possibility.
And also this story, the street vets story, focuses on the vets and volunteers who are donating their time and helping. So there are resources for people to care for their animals.
Yes. The biggest challenge that animals who are living on the street with their humans face is basic preventative care. Access to preventative care when you live on the street is very difficult. It's either a mobile unit showing up to where you are, or it's something like one of our board members, Deanna, is photographing the PAW team in Portland, who has a clinic that's for anybody really, but focused on low income and on unsheltered people and their pets. Or it's Dr. Kwan from Project Street Vet, who literally just walks the streets and gives as much preventative care as he and his team can do. And that goes a long way. The other thing we look at is not just the veterinarians, but some of these rescue organizations like Jameson Humane in Napa, which is a place you don't associate with homelessness, but it's real, it's there, it's everywhere. They're doing outreach clinics. To me, we're looking at this thing of like, there's not just a hero coming in and doing something amazing, right? Like Dr. Kwan is doing. It's really incredible. But there's also people you might not normally think of who are living on the street and giving care to pets. So that's pretty incredible. And to me, it embodies, what these stories are all about.
So we've had a theme kind of going on the last few podcasts around emotion, like stirring emotion to create change and how important that is. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about why emotion is so important in animal advocacy work, because that's what you're doing with this. That's what film does, is it stirs our emotion. Why do you think that's important in the work we do?
I think stirring and inspiring emotion is important in the work we do because it's the only reason we make decisions. Even, when we think logically through a thing and plan for a thing, the driving force behind our planning is an emotional choice, either to go towards pleasure or away from pain. In these films and photo essays, these stories we do, if we can connect the pain that humans and non-human animals are experiencing because of situations that we ourselves have caused, and if we can do it in a way that is gentle and invites people in to make a change rather than makes them feel guilty or enraged, our goal is our hope is that people come away with this sense of, that's incredible. I think I could do something like that too in my own way.
Yeah, that's interesting, that pain and pleasure thing you kind of touched on, because I think that a lot of people feel, oh, well, if I go vegan, I'm not gonna have the same pleasure experience with food, right? And this
Mhm.
is something that we seek, is this pleasure with food and our experiences. But what you come to realize is that, this pleasure that you feel or that you experience eating animal products is causing pain, causes
Yeah.
pain to others. So instead, when you're eating vegan food, and vegan food is very pleasurable, of course, we learn this when we go vegan and we get into a regular diet of veganism. Of course, we're experiencing just as much pleasure in our food, but I think there's a deeper pleasure that happens when you realize that you're not causing the pain,
Yeah,
right? That the pleasure you're experiencing is a pleasure of being compassionate and of not causing that pain and of a contentment knowing that you are not part of that suffering anymore.
yeah, I would agree. It's a really nice feeling.
Yeah, and you've talked about actually creating a sanctuary in your own mind when we were talking about the sanctuary work and filming and documenting sanctuaries, and you were talking about creating a sanctuary in your own mind and mindfulness. Do you want to talk a little about that?
I would love to talk about that. As I continue to go through this exploration and this documentation of animal rescue, at first I thought, okay, this is a sanctuary where animals are able to live out their lives and get rehabilitated, and that's really nice. Then I realized what they were being rehabilitated from, why they were there in the first place. And then that opened my eyes even more to all of the different types of suffering that humans and non-human animals experience just by virtue of being born on Earth here. And I thought there are places in our lives where we take refuge, right? Our home, our family, our relationships, and even those things are temporary. So, how do we find a sanctuary within our own mind? And that has led me personally down the path of Buddhism and learning mindfulness techniques to be able to create this place that exists for me that looks at all of the suffering and looks at all the joy and sees it as one system that is just working the only way that it can work. And I would say mindfulness is kind of the bridge between the anger that we might feel when we see an issue that we, get fired up about, or the sadness that we feel about that issue. Mindfulness is the bridge between those emotions and action that is sustainable. So anger, yeah, a lot of energy. You can take that, you can run with it super hard for probably a long time and eventually burn out.
Mhm.
And sadness, in my experience, is more of this crippling, well, like, why do anything? Because it's just going to be this way anyway. But if we hold either and both of those with mindfulness, then there's this empowering factor, I think, that allows us to take action, meaningful action that is sustainable. And for
Yeah.
those of us who are advocates for animals, advocates for humans, we need to do this long term. We can't burn out.
Yeah, and I love this. I love this idea of creating a sanctuary in your own mind. It's so beautiful. I love that thought. And like you were saying, taking meaningful action. Before I started digging into the Dharma traditions, which I love to do, to me everything seemed so random and horrible, and all the sadness, like you were talking about, it can be so crippling, right?
Mm,
But, when I started thinking about larger concepts like mindfulness, like ahimsa, and how that relates to your karma and taking action to alleviate the suffering of the world, to help shift that karmic baggage that we have, and to help the world to fulfill its dharma. It's really beautiful. I love all of that. It helps me to see the world in a different way with a more peaceful and positive outlook rather than, everything is so awful and suffering. And that is true. Everything is suffering. And that's kind of where you start with all this. But then there's tools and ways that you can help yourself, others, the community, the universe to be more mindful and therefore alleviate karma and draw in ahimsa. It's all so connected and beautiful.
yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's the only way to look at it where I think you said it all makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely brings in a kind of a universal balance and justice with karma. I love that part of it. And just that there is a deeper, there's something going on deeper. There's a deeper meaning to all of this. And no one should suffer meaninglessly, right? The suffering does have meaning, and it's around us trying to trying to raise our consciousness up to be on a different level so that we can, live a more connected and compassionate life. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all very beautiful.
Yeah, it is. Well, I love that you have this podcast to share that message.
Yeah, yeah, and explore all of that. It's amazing how many of these conversations start with the work we're doing for animals and then evolve into how can we change ourselves as people to be better in the world, to do better for animals, to do better for each other, to make a more beautiful community, right?
Yeah.
It's good work to do.
Yeah, I sort of think, at least in terms of sanctuary doc, is like animals and these stories are really just a gateway to everything that you just talked about.
Yeah. Yeah, but the animals are central to it and important to it, and that's why we hold them up as the conduit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And veganism, that's what it is to me. It's a conduit for not only relieving suffering for animals, but to create a compassionate world that is, just for everyone. So Thomas, we like to try to end on a positive note. So I want to ask you, what gives you hope for the future?
I think hope is a necessity, and I think it's something that I practice hoping.
Mm,
Certainly, all the stories that we do give me hope, and I envision a world that is more kind and less harsh, and I think that it's possible. I think that we need to practice hope, and there's this beautiful quote that I want to read that says, "Optimism is the belief that things will get better. Hope is the belief that together we can make things better. Optimism is a passive virtue, hope an active one. It takes no courage, only a certain naivety to be an optimist. It takes courage to sustain hope."
wow, that was beautiful. I love that.
That's a quote by a Jewish rabbi.
Having the name Hope, I really resonate and love. I love that quote. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's really true. We have to have courage to do the work we do. I like that he said that you have to have courage to have hope. And it's so true. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm excited about Sanctuary Docs and where it's going to go and more stories to come. Thank you for doing this work.
Thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for having me on.
Thank you for listening to the Hope for the Animals podcast, a project of compassionate living. I hope you check out Sanctuary Docs. They have great stories in multimedia visual forms. Watch them, share them, and be sure to tell your own stories. Remember that when you're talking to someone about veganism, about animals, you're telling their story, the story of individual sentient animals, a story that they're unable to tell. And it's our responsibility to share the emotion, the urgency, the importance of their individual story. So look for ways, look for opportunities to tell stories and live vegan.